Welcome to the Just Solutions podcast. I'm your host, Aiko Schaefer. Minneapolis possesses a long history of community-led movements, from labor strikes in the early 1900s, the Black Lives Matter groundswell around the murder of George Floyd, to recent immigrant justice actions to protect communities from ICE. It's no surprise, then, that Minneapolis is where the Center for Earth, Energy, and Democracy, or CEED, is leading a national movement to build power for environmental justice. On this show, we'll be talking about the environmental justice movement and what is driving wins. We've asked staff from CEED to join us to talk about their work in the state and how they're helping lead a national movement. We have Byron Ramos Gudiel, Executive Director, and Dalal Aboulhosn, Managing Director of Program and Policy. While so much has been lost on the federal front with rollbacks and attacks on fundamental environmental and climate policy, the work to advance justice continues. We want to share with you insights on pathways forward and what it will take to drive wins. CEED has been a longtime leader in the environmental justice movement in the Midwest, and they're also playing a role in the creation and work of the Platform for a Just Climate. This is a national coalition working to build power for environmental justice through collaboration between frontline communities and mainstream green organizations. The platform works to ensure those most harmed by climate change and the fossil fuel economy can actively participate in developing, winning, and implementing environmental policies that address community needs. Thank you, Byron and Dalal, for joining us today.
Thank you, Aiko. Really excited to be here with you and excited to dive into all things movement with you.
Thank you, Aiko. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
So, Byron, you and I have known each other for a long time. You were the Executive Director of Communities for a Better Environment in California. Then you headed over to the Sierra Club where you met Dalal. Maybe you knew each other before then, and now you're leading CEED. What motivates you to work on environmental justice?
Thank you, Aiko. It's so good to be here with you and the crew. Always a good time. Yeah, I guess we have known each other for a minute. Wow. Okay. So that's a lot of history. Yeah, we have. At the heart of it for me has always been about proximity. So making sure that the resources, the relationships, and the decision-making power flow toward the communities that are most impacted, not away from them. And doing that not just for one campaign or one moment, but by building the kind of durable, and sometimes I've called it permanent infrastructure that outlasts any single administration or funding cycle or political moment. To me, that's what real power looks like. Not borrowed, not contingent, but really rooted. And so I've always looked for places that gave me the opportunity to move resources, and I'm not just talking about money, but certainly money, in that direction. And so Communities for a Better Environment is one of the oldest, most historic, accomplished environmental justice organizations in the country. And I really saw an opportunity there to continue to build an organization's legacy in that way. And so one of the highlights there for me was helping to build the California Environmental Justice Alliance strategy, the Climate Justice Alliance strategy as well, from the place of building durable, permanent movement building and power building infrastructure that roots power in NEJ communities and frontline communities. And the same with the Sierra Club. The Sierra Club is an organization also historic, one of the oldest environmental organizations in the country. And there was an opportunity there to really move not just strategy, but resources towards strategy and work that build power as the front lines and fence line communities and environmental justice communities as well. And that's what we're doing here at CEED.
That's great. So much of the justice conversation is rightfully focused on the Southeast U.S. There's so much fossil fuel infrastructure there, or the West Coast, right? California, New York. So Dalal, what is it about the Midwest in particular that inspires you? Why should we pay attention to that part of the U.S.?
So the Midwest is a really amazing place. And one of the things that I very much appreciate about it is how community-led it is. And we saw that really highlighted in the beginning of this year when ICE came in and terrorized Minneapolis and the Twin City area for more than a month, and still feeling the ripple effects, even though the surge has waned a bit. But what that showed is the power that is the Midwest and Minnesota specifically, but throughout that region of close-knit communities who come together to really solve the problems in front of them, including the climate crisis at hand. Not only is the Midwest really community-based, but it is also really diverse. You have places like Chicago, you have the Dakotas, you have St. Louis, and everything in between. You have urban and rural, you have a lot of indigenous communities, people of color and immigrant communities, people who've been there for hundreds of years working the land, and farmers and ranchers. And so the diversity really just adds to that sense of community and to the solutions that we need for a climate crisis. We can't have just one solution. Unfortunately, there is no silver bullet that is going to get us out of the place we are. And so the Midwest really is a shining example of all the different ways we need to address climate right now. And the way to do that is through community-led solutions.
I couldn't agree with you more. As someone who was born and raised in the Midwest, it's such an interesting place, very diverse, as you said, and lots of things that they are working through and could lead on and are leading on. So, Byron, what is CEED's role in the environmental justice movement or broadly in the climate movement?
CEED is a Midwest organization. We were born in Minneapolis. And from there, we, over the last 12, 13 years, we helped establish other networks, other coalitions. We helped to ground policy strategy through research, and eventually had a pretty prominent role in helping to build a coalition, the Platform for a Just Climate, that was actively helping to push the Biden administration for justice-centered policy. So we do Midwest work. We also obviously do national work as well. And we like to think of ourselves as co-strategists, coalition anchor, and holder of policy infrastructure, and helping to create shared strategic agendas around those goals, and then moving resources toward those. So really building capacity around shared agendas.
And Byron, it's always been such a pleasure for Just Solutions to be such a partner, active partner with CEED, and always have enjoyed the work that we do together and really inspired by what you all have accomplished in the Midwest. And of course, as we talk about the Platform for a Just Climate. So Dalal, why was creating this platform so important? I mean, tell us a little bit more about who helped to create it and why was that work so important? And we'll add on the show notes the actual platform so people can read it. But I'd love to hear a little bit about the who, the why, and we'll get into sort of how it's going in a bit.
The Platform for a Just Climate was created in a moment under the first Trump administration that in some ways is very much like our current moment. In 2018, a time where we had few possibilities of winning EJ policies at a federal level, leaders from the environmental justice community, from national groups, and from support groups all came together to create a visionary platform that laid out a pathway towards a just climate future. Not only were we able to align as a movement on a shared vision for a just climate future, but we were also able to successfully advocate for policies that pave the way towards that future. Under the Biden administration, the platform was able to play a pivotal role in shaping climate policies. We saw for the first time in history hundreds of billions of dollars in federal spending and EJ investments that reduced and cleaned up pollution, provided energy assistance, and replaced crumbling infrastructure to improve public health. We also saw the creation of the first ever White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, which included a number of our members from a Platform for a Just Climate. And this group was really instrumental in making sure that investments were moving at a federal level and were tirelessly advocating for EJ at a national and federal level as well. So now we find ourselves in Trump 2.0, and this coalition is more important than ever. We have spent many years aligning and coordinating and working with a broad range of EJ and national groups, and that really has set us up to fight back what Trump and his administration is doing on environmental justice, which really is erasing it from a national conversation and policies. And it's also allowing us to imagine and think about the world after Trump is gone. And we're doing a lot of that work right now. So this is really a space in which we can do two things. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. We're really fighting what is in front of us and setting ourselves up to be powerful and influential when the time comes to really push EJ solutions at a national level.
And Dalal, when you talk about the we of the platform, who are some of the members that are part of that effort?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So we have 12 environmental justice organizations that include folks like Deep South and We Act. We also have 6 national groups. Some of those include Sierra Club and NRDC. But we also have over 300 co-signers to the platform that range from EJ groups to national groups to even some international groups who all support and play a role in the work that we're doing.
Byron, help our listeners understand a little bit of what you all are seeing about the impacts in environmental justice communities, their response to this moment, sort of what are the challenges there and opportunities?
It didn't take long for this administration to do a lot of the things that they were saying they were going to do. This administration was really clear about its intentions. So, we saw the immediate effort deregulate. And of course, those impacts are going to be felt by everyone, but more acutely, I should say, in low-income communities, communities of color, Black and Indigenous communities, where the impacts are compounded, right? There's less availability of quality healthcare. There's less access to jobs where folks are afforded the opportunity to take time off if they're not feeling well or not doing well. And there's already just historic pollution cited in those communities, right? And so the playing field was never level, of course, to begin with. And so from day one, we saw Trump and the administration attack not just the regulations, but really values, environmental justice values that have shaped protection work in those communities and across the country. Policies and investments in those communities were completely gutted right away. There was no, probably within the first, we saw that a lot of that within the first 100 days. The Trump administration not only ignored and continues to ignore decades of science, but also targeting our most valuable, vulnerable communities, I should say, and valuable, but also vulnerable communities, using the EPA to protect polluters and to protect profit of corporate polluters in particular. One example of that, of course, is the repeal of the endangerment finding. As you know, Aiko, the endangerment finding is the backbone of protections that limit pollution for power plants and highways and oil and gas industry, and it is especially crucial in Black, Brown, Indigenous, and low-income communities who already breathe some of the dirtiest air in the country. I read somewhere that 156 million people are living in places that get failing grades for unhealthy levels of ozone in particular, and particulate pollution. So, again, right, the repeal, the gutting of these resources, of these protections, of these laws that were based on lived experience, but also science and data. Our communities aren't just experiencing a shift in political climate. They are really experiencing a compounding impact to experiences that they have for decades have been struggling with, living with, fighting against. And so these actions by the administrations are going to have just a dramatic impact in these communities for at the very least a generation.
And Byron, you remind me that we work together along with about 70 policy leaders in the movement, broadly in the movement, people who care about economic and social and racial justice, to anticipate what the president would be doing. And, that work was done in conjunction of thinking of other possible scenarios. I think many of us knew what was happening and hoped that we wouldn't have to see that happen. And I think that while we were ready, I don't think that we were as prepared for the speed and prepared for the depth of action that actually is taking place right now. So, Dalal, I wanted to ask this question. Byron talked about the compounding effect, and I think it's really interesting given that you are in the Minneapolis area, you all work in Minnesota. We all were watching what was happening there with the ICE raid. How are you seeing the movement shift or change or the compounding nature of all of these attacks happening on so many fronts? I mean, what are you seeing nationally? What are you seeing there in Minnesota?
I think it's important to realize that all of the work we do is not siloed. Environmental justice lives within an ecosystem of all the other justice fights that are in front of us, whether that is reproductive rights, whether that is immigrant rights, whether that's LGBTQ rights. or civil rights. These are all interconnected and very purposely so. We can't have one justice, one place and not have it throughout. And I think that really was highlighted in Minnesota earlier this year when the ICE surge happened. We saw that not only were communities being targeted, but all of the issues that have been bubbling up in Minnesota, whether that was from the Herc trash incinerator that has been a fight locally because of the health impacts it's caused, obviously the immigration rights that were at hand, democracy at its core. And so what we're seeing is the real stress that is happening across the country in communities being really felt. And as Byron is noting that this isn't something that's going to change because an election result either later this year or in a couple of years from now, this is something that we will be dealing with for a long time, and recognizing that our ecosystem is diverse and needs care and attention, not only to the people who occupy it, but to the air they breathe and the water they drink and the land that they are on and the access to the land that they have, and the democracy and voting and all of the other things really need to come together to make sure that we can make these places whole again.
So, Byron, you all have worked a lot with traditional green groups who have historically not worked on environmental justice. So the platform was really an effort to try to bring those communities together to work together. And we think about people who, don't track environmental justice. Maybe they don't live in environmental justice communities. I mean, why should other people care about this issue? And really, why do the green groups that you work with, why are they at the table with you all?
I would share that downwind and downstream effects have been well documented. You don't have to live in EJ communities to be impacted by toxic hotspots, for instance, or that are, a few neighborhoods away. When climate disaster hits, I'm from Northeast Los Angeles and, about a mile and a half away from the Altadena fire last year and, about 20 miles away from the Pacific Palisades fire. So my neighborhood was not on fire, but I was certainly impacted both psychologically, emotionally, and also physically by those fires. And so while it's important to acknowledge that Black communities like Altadena and do face inequities to their recovery, we see that even, it's not just Altadena that's struggling to recover. We mentioned earlier, that EJ communities are vulnerable and also valuable. Altadena, for instance, was a historically Black community and as a result of redlining throughout the county and the city. And as a result, it just produced a lot of culture, a lot of art, a lot of music. It was a place where Black and brown people throughout the county actually felt safe in green spaces, as an example. And all of that is gone, right? And so as folks in Altadena are struggling and fighting with insurance companies to rebuild their lives, build their homes, people throughout the city and the county are also feeling the loss of just the culture that community has provided to the broader ecosystem, right? And so it is important for all of us to really think about not just how we are vulnerable in the face of climate, but also how our neighbors are vulnerable and how that impacts us as well. Because of course, we're all going to be impacted by climate change, but there are communities that are acutely impacted in ways that don't just affect them in those communities, but of course affect us. And these are issues of civil rights and justice. And we should care about that because, paraphrasing tons and tons of amazing quotes, right? But like, if one of us feels injustice for our neighbors is not far away. It's making its way to you. So there's a lot of reasons. There's a lot of reasons why we all should care about what's happening to environmental justice communities.
For sure. I'm particularly interested in the platform's work of bringing together environmental justice organizations and mainstream national green organizations. We can both say there has not been a great history of working together, collaborating together, and the platform was really focused on figuring out how to do that and then subsequently led to the creation of the platform. Can you talk a little bit about the sort of your sense of how it might have changed over time or if it's changing under the circumstances?
Yeah, I think it is changing. I think from our perspective, the reason why the platform in particular at the national level continues to evolve and grow and iterate as a group is because, we have shared principles that are rooted in justice. And a lot of these organizations, these national organizations, started out as conservation organizations or science-based organizations or issue-specific organizations. Environmental justice organizations, as you know, really grow out of a very particular need in a particular community. And some of these needs are at the nexus of climate impacts, of course, but also systems of oppression. And the leadership of these organizations, at least the ones that are part of the platform, have acknowledged that dynamic exists for Black and Brown and Indigenous and other communities of color and low-income communities. And so that initial acknowledgement is what the foundation of our platform. We don't expect that there's going to be agreement on all things. As a matter of fact, there isn't agreement on all things. But what we try to do is build strategy around where we do have agreement. And the table itself is important not just for the things that we agree on, but it's also equally as important, and in some cases maybe even more important, for the things that we don't agree on. Because there is a space where we actually can chop that up, right? Can spend some time actually like putting these hard issues at the center of a table where there is agreement that at the very least we're going to have those hard conversations. And CEED's role is to make sure that those conversations happen in a structured and principled way, and that they do have an impact for the way that we move as a coalition forward. So I think it is changing in that regard. We're not running away from these dynamics. We're not running away from these disagreements and these hard conversations. The platform serves as a structure to actually really center those as part of our work. And Dalal and I always say this, it's, we have to see that dynamic as part of our work, not as something that we'll get to when we get to.
Well, I give you a lot of credit for the work that you're doing and trying to build bridges across those two communities, especially in this moment. In a lot of states where environmental justice, climate justice coalitions are really leading and have been advancing solutions, they are seeing a lot of pullback from climate commitments, a lot of pulling back of other allies, other groups that are shifting and moving their attention, some for political reasons, some for, perhaps just resource reasons. So Dalal, I believe that as a part of the platform, you all looked at the public's perspective or public opinion around environmental justice. Is that true? And if so, it'd be great to hear more about what you all found.
Yeah, thank you for that. And what we are seeing through the polls is that while most people are unfamiliar with the term environmental justice, we're seeing that 70% of voters agree with the idea that every community, regardless of race, income, or zip code, deserve fair treatment and meaningful involvement in environmental policies. So what does that mean? It means that maybe we're not using the same terms, but we have the same values. And that is really important as we lean into the work that we need done for climate solutions. We also see that climate-led solutions are deeply popular when they address affordability, public health, and corporate accountability. Again, leaning into a lot of the things that we're hearing being discussed around other issues, and those values are really what needs to be highlighted, that people really want to be rooted in what they're seeing around them and what works for their communities, that they want healthy places for their children to live and grow, and that we don't want to be held hostage by corporate profits, and that we really want to see the solutions come from within. That is something we're seeing across the board. Environmental justice is a word that not a lot of folks maybe know, and maybe that's something we need to do more education on and have more conversations about. But we already have a really clear pathway and a really nice way to talk about that, because those values are really being reflected back to us in those conversations. It's just the terminology that maybe is where we are not meeting up. And, that's Aiko, not super surprising, knowing that, sometimes the messaging is hard. And right now the world is so inundated with not only all the terrible things that this Trump administration is doing to our country and the world, but just the way that we get our information now as well. So I think there's a lot of learnings here, but I think the silver lining is that people are really hungry for the values that environmental justice wants to deliver.
That's great to hear. So much of what you say, Dalal, is so synonymous to the MAHA movement. When I think about the elements of what they talk about in terms of health and safety, concern for corporate corruption or co-optation of the government, there's so many elements of what is spoken there that can sound very EJ-like. And I know that there are efforts by the left to try to figure out how to better engage that base. And perhaps now, because I think some of them may be pulling away from their support or thinking about the solutions that the Trump administration or RFK are advancing. So is that kind of far-fetched to think about uniting that far?
I don't think it's far-fetched. I think, as Byron was pointing out, is we're all individuals and our organizations have different missions and values as well. And there is going to be places where we disagree and places where we align, and not being the enemy of the perfect, right? We want to make sure that we are progressing forward into a just world where we do have all the things that our communities need. And that means working across a broad spectrum where those values and where that work maybe aligns. And again, might not be 100% perfect across everything. We might disagree on some things here, but agree on some things over there. And so I think looking into those partnerships is important. Where they come to fruition, I think, is still to be seen, but I don't think blocking off any conversation in this moment where we need unity more than anything else is really important.
Yeah, for sure. Byron, one of the things that you and I share in common is that we build coalitions. So as the director of Communities for a Better Environment, you helped to start Climate Justice Alliance, a national EJ organization. You're involved in developing the platform, which is a coalition effort. So why is a coalition so important to winning? And what's your sense of what the ideal coalition needs to be in this moment?
I am right now studying. It feels more like studying more than reading Scott Nakagawa's anti-authoritarian playbook. So in his work, and Scott Nakagawa's work, he talks about power not being a pyramid, it's a table. And so that our focus or our target isn't the strong man, right? But but we should be talking and thinking about the legs of the table, because that is where power is being consolidated. And those legs are not, in one place. They don't listen to one set of constituents or communities. They have different levers, right? And so the other thing that I've learned from his authoritarian playbook is that the distinction between an issue campaign and anti-authoritarian movement, and that movement is not really tactical. It's really the whole ballgame, right? And one of the things that he does in his writing is that he talks about how the system was a target. It wasn't a specific policy fight, right? And so if you understand and believe those things, that power is not centralized in one place or one person, if you believe that, that this is a system versus a person really that is doing all this harm, then there's no way that you can believe that one organization or one community is going to be able to build the kind of power that can fight back. And so coalitions provide an opportunity, because it's not, as you and I very well know, there's no guarantee that we're going to be able to build the kind of power that is greater than the sum of the parts, as we say. But it is an opportunity that we can't afford to not engage in genuinely and wholehearted. And so it is the only strategy. And it actually, Scott's writing also uses a metaphor of streams into a river, right? And that we're all like our streams. And so you can think about communities or organizations and communities as streams that are feeding into a river that can really provide the kind of power to respond to this moment in a way that those streams on their own cannot.
Yeah.
So
yeah, such an important point.
It really is. And it sort of illustrates the idea of collective power, right? The things that and our members tell us this all the time, actually. And even our national organizations tell us this all the time, that there's no way that they could accomplish the things on their own that they can as part of this coalition. And that's, part of what keeps folks engaged in the platform.
One of the ways that the Republicans or the right wing have been very successful is that they tend to talk about culture and they tend to look for ways to undo systems and structures. I think people on the left tend to work on issues. And of course, the challenge with that is that issues are narrow, so it may not be something that a lot of people care about, and it may or may not have the impact that you're looking for. So when you have an approach that's systems, culture shifting, and then you have an issues-based movement, it could be an explanation to why we never really recoup, right? So I think you have an administration, if we look just at the presidency, that is able to undo so much. And then if there's a shift in power, we kind of make some gains, but those gains don't have the durability. And we could have a whole conversation about the Inflation Reduction Act as a particular case study. And then you have, again, another president who is talking about culture, systems, and then we come back with issues. So it's an interesting conversation, both around what you're saying around the importance of coalition building. And I think systems and culture allows us to build bigger coalitions, right, than it is about issues, something definitely worth thinking about. We can put on the show notes Scott's piece as well for people to check out. So Dalal, I feel like I might have undermined the question I have for you by saying all that, which is, in the work that you're doing, are there any particular efforts or issues that you're hearing that you feel like has the capacity to really unite and build a strong, powerful coalition around environmental justice?
I think to what you were saying just before, the answer is yes. And the way we do that is we do lean into our values. It's what we're seeing across the country that people are hungry for. And there are issues in which we can highlight our values. One is to lead with health impacts. We know from research that the health frame consistently resonates across audiences, that people value clean water, clean air, and that includes folks like the MAHA branch of the MAGA Republicans. And we also see that people are wanting to be able to afford and have cost of living in their daily lives. This is another value that we should be leaning into, and that we should really be thinking about environmental justice as able to reduce household costs by improving air and water quality, lowering energy bills, and protecting access to essential services. Another value is stopping corporate polluters and corporate corruption as a whole. We consistently see that environmental justice is more effective when other injustices are represented in that conversation, and making sure that we know who the real villain is and who is the cause of a lot of the issues we see happening in our communities. So we can have a conversation and we can build together through our values. And I think it is important, as you're saying, Aiko, to look maybe beyond just a particular issue and really leaning into what folks are feeling and seeing right now, and answering that honestly with the solutions that are being led in communities and how those could positively affect what is not only happening to them, but then can be built upon throughout the country at a national level to make sure that we all are on the same footing and that we are leaning into what is protecting and growing the world that we're living in.
All of that sounds really great. And I think the other part too is, I think that what the EJ movement brings, and it brings many, many things, I think, to the work is this recognition that the system is rigged. For a lot of people out there who are simply following the rules, trying to do the right thing, I think they feel like the world's kind of against them, government's against them, people aren't paying attention to them. I think we often perhaps shine too bright of a the world is good and everything's possible sort of message. And I think the environmental movement is just much more grounded in reality, much more connected to people and community, much more aware of what the community needs and wants, which is a very different orientation than sort of a top-down, sit in DC, think of ideas and sort of push it out to communities. And so I think, those big, bright ideas and the fact that you all are facilitating those conversations is just really, really valuable, really, really important. So Byron, for a listeners, what advice do you have for them if someone wants to work on environmental justice? Maybe they have something in their community that they're really concerned about that they want to fight, or what is advice for an ally, someone who's listening who wants to get more involved in this issue?
Really question the assumptions that you bring to this work and to how you understand the work of climate and environmental justice. Frontline communities, and I said this earlier, are not experiencing this as a political shift, right? So if this administration is replaced by a Democratic administration in 2 years, it's not just a political shift. What they're experiencing is an acceleration of harms that were already present. And the second thing to understand about this moment, I think that will help you figure out how to actually, or where to make contributions or how to participate, is that what we're talking about here, the rollbacks, the attacks on communities, it is systematic. Targeting, monitoring, science, cleanup standards, and emissions, all this is being done simultaneously. It certainly is deregulation, but it's deregulation with the purpose of consolidating power, and corporate power in particular. The third thing in terms of analysis that I would suggest that we learn to sit with is that this work is not about reverting back to the democracy that we had pre-Trump. That democracy was not working for a lot of communities. And so if we challenge those assumptions, and if we're clear about what's happening in these communities beyond just a policy fight, if we just stop thinking about this as a policy fight, and are clear about what this is about consolidation of corporate power, then we start understanding issues like deregulation, but also data centers, from a completely different place. And then comes the suggestions, right? Like I would suggest looking at who's actually doing this work right now. If you have means, donate. Become a sustainer donor of environmental justice organizations, grassroots, organizations that are the closest to these issues in those communities. If you're an organizer or want to learn how to organize, there's no better place to organize than in communities, in your community where these fights are going to happen and are going to have to happen. So think about that. Look for resources. For example, at CEED, if you go to our website, you will find just a whole slew of resources to help you not just understand these issues, but also talk to other people, your neighbors, about these issues. You'll find zines and guidebooks and different sort of resources about the issues that are really having an impact in our communities right now. And there might be resources that you can relate to because of where you live or where somebody that you cares about live, or neighboring community. So look for those resources, look for those opportunities at the most local levels. And if you can't, and if you have the means, look to support those organizations through individual donations and becoming sustainer donors of those organizations as well.
Thank you, Byron and Dalal, for being with us today. And thanks to you, our listeners, for joining us on the Just Solutions podcast. We'll add information that we talked about today on our show notes. Special thanks to our recording engineer, Angel Bautista. If you enjoyed this episode, leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts and consider supporting us with a donation. If you'd like to do that or want to learn more about our work at Just Solutions, visit our website at justsolutionscollective.org. You can also follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, Blue Sky, and Facebook for the latest updates. Together, we are driving community-created and equity-centered solutions to the climate crisis. We hope you'll join us for our next episode.